Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. I, as of recording right now, still haven't uploaded last week's podcast because I don't know if you listened to the radio version of it, but had my friend Andrew on here, and we went an entire hour and 45 minutes at least past the airtime slot of the show, just talking about ridiculousness, and there's so much I have to edit out of there. I haven't had time to go back and edit some of the stuff out of the podcast. I won't even get into the types of things that I need to edit out. It's just kind of better that you don't know. I was telling my wife about some of the things we were talking about. She's like, yeah, I could understand if you want to edit that out. Anyways, thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. You can go to geektherapyradio.com for more information. You can always contact me straight through there. There's a form to contact me straight on the homepage. I'm thinking about revamping the website sometime soon. I've got a merch store on there. I don't really care about it. I care about it as much as y'all obviously care about it, which is not at all. So I'll see what I want to do with that. Maybe take it down. The problem is that I put the merch store up and I was in 2020, and I was thinking, okay, it'll be cool for listeners to go if they want to get like a Geek Therapy Radio mug or some Geek Therapy Radio stickers or just kind of some swag. And I was looking, I was like, I don't want to be charging a whole lot of money. Like, I just want options on there, $5, include shipping, all that kind of stuff. Just kind of some cheap knickknacks that people can buy. I guess I just don't think highly of myself enough to charge, top dollar for anything. But the problem is, if you remember, I just said I started this store in 2020 and supply chain issues and COVID and everything out the butt. So the only thing I was able to offer in the store was some stickers, which is like, okay, cool. I think there was a mug, if I'm not mistaken, and a beach towel. I was like, all I want to put in there is yes, the stickers, maybe, yeah, the mug, but I want t-shirts, like just t-shirts. No, it was impossible. It was almost impossible, at least at the time I put the merch store up on geektherapyradio.com, that I couldn't offer t-shirts. I'm like, well, then why bother? So I'll see. I need to revamp the website. I'm debating whether or not I want to include a merch store or not. I am also debating taking my Patreon down. I think I have maybe 1 or 2 Patreon supporters on there, and I don't feel right asking y'all to support me on Patreon because I don't put a whole ton of extra content on there. It just, frankly, the time escapes me. Full-time job, I'm a dad, and just things get busy, and I'm just thinking, what kind of extra content can I put on there? The thing is that I do produce extra content from time to time. I really do, but I don't put it behind a paywall. And I'm not saying there's nothing against, bigger creators. Listen, if you have 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, or you have 100,000 listeners every, week to your podcast, whatever, by all means, put up a Patreon store. The law of averages are that, a couple percent of your listeners and your followers will support you on Patreon. And that couple percent of, 100,000, couple percent of 1 million, that's a lot of revenue. That's quit your day job kind of money. I don't have that with Geek Therapy Radio. I have been on the air here in Houston since 2017, almost exactly 5 years at this point. It's 2022 right now, and I just haven't been pushing to make a bunch of money off of this. And I think one reason is that, I'm gainfully employed otherwise, and I just don't have that kind of greed. I don't want to call it greed, because there's a healthy, like, if you can make money doing what you're doing and people want to support you and it's of their own free will, that's completely fine. Like, I'm thinking, like, could I be making 6 figures if I just have pushed Geek Therapy Radio further and tried to, really turn it into a financial situation, turn it into a moneymaker? But for some, I guess I just don't have that. I guess I just don't have that kind of drive in me to just make money. Like, my drive is to make what I need to make a living, make what I need to put money aside for, retirement and my son's education and any future children we may have, make sure that they're comfortable and fed, and that I'm happy and my wife's happy. And I'm just like, if we got all those boxes checked, like, why would I go through the extra stress of trying to turn something I love into a moneymaker, like the side hustle into a moneymaker. I love what I do for the museum of Houston Museum of Natural Science. I make YouTube videos for them. I create digital content I love what I do, and I'm not hungry. So the idea of, asking y'all for money every week, support me on Patreon, even though I barely ever put anything new up there, because anything new I do put out, I just give to y'all for free. So I just don't feel right asking y'all for money. So that's why I haven't pushed the merch store much either, look much into the merch stores. I just, for some reason, I just have it in my mind. Like I don't want any of your enjoyment for Geek Therapy Radio to cost you anything. And that's the kind of struggle that I have, is kind of like, well, but there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with creating merchandise, and people don't have to buy it. People don't have to support Patreon. People don't have to do it. But it just feels weird, like asking you to. And maybe one day, if Geek Therapy Radio grows and I do have tens of thousands or 100,000 people listening each week, or eyeballs or clicks or whatever each week, maybe at that point I'll work on something, because at that point it would be making more money. I could stretch and bend things in other areas to put more focus into Geek Therapy Radio or whatever. But I'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But yeah, part of me is like, I really should push Geek Therapy Radio forward. I really should chomp at the bit more and just try to get like affiliates across the country and reach out to radio stations more and try to grow this thing. But I've been on for 5 years. There's no such thing as another radio show that goes on for this amount of time with no sponsors. And again, I'm not complaining, because I'm just really happy at what I do. And to wrap up this segment, the side benefit of not having sponsors is obviously, as you've heard me over the past few weeks, when I get my mansies, I go on my menstrual cycle, I say whatever I want to say about anything I want to say it about, with zero worry that it's going to offend a sponsor, or maybe I shouldn't say something because the sponsor won't like me saying that. That's part of the benefit is, okay, on the downside, I don't make any money off the show. On the plus side, I can say whatever darn well I want, because I don't have anybody paying the bills around here to worry about their feelings or losing their money. So anyways, more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. I want to talk about EPO. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I'm thinking about changing my bump music again at some point. I love this bump music. It's called Pale Blue Dot by Adam Young. You might know Adam Young as his more famous concept name is Owl City. But he made this music royalty free, and I use it. It's really chill. But I kind of want more upbeat bump music now, maybe something that kind of gets to the show quicker. The reason I chose this bump music is that it was really chill to like put you in like a calm spirit, like calm mood while you listen, before you hear the content of the show. But I'm thinking I want to change it. I think I want to change it up a little bit. Maybe not have like a minute and a half or whatever of pre-roll, because there's no freaking way that most of you listening out there aren't hitting this, the fast forward 30 seconds button on your podcast app, because there's just so much pre-roll on the bump music. I guarantee you 95% of you are clicking skip just to get to the point where I'm talking. So I want to get maybe shorter bump music at the front, so we can just dive into it, more time for geeky stuff. I do want to talk about EPO, but sometimes here on Geek Therapy Radio, I like to get cathartic and existential. When I'm talking, it's part of the Geek Therapy, and the name of the title of the show is Geek Therapy Radio, and sometimes this is therapy for me, just to kind of stream of consciousness, get things off my chest, get things out of my mind. Because here's the thing, the last segment, I was talking about how I've been on the air for 5 years. I'm perfectly happy where I'm at. I don't have this killer instinct or this healthy greed to kind of grow the show into a big money-making thing. And that on the downside of that is, hey, I don't make any money off of this. But the upside is that I don't have to answer to friggin' anybody about anything I say, usually. There was one testy episode that I got back a few weeks ago, and my radio boss emailed me. He's like, hey, we need to talk about something. But they didn't take me off the air. I tested the free speech thing, I will just say, and I'm happy to report that 950 does in fact believe in free speech, because they let me have that episode that should have gotten me fired, but didn't, and I am very grateful for that. So, like I said a while back, making no money, downside is I make no money, but the plus side is that I don't answer to anybody. I don't have to consider sponsors' feelings, which means that I can go off on these therapeutic diatribes and streams of consciousness. And since my show is not a big, giant, hugely affiliated across the country with millions of listeners like, Walton and Johnson or Michael Berry or Jesse Kelly or whoever else is on the station and on our sister stations, that means that who I have, that the people have who listen to me each week, either on the air or in the podcast, y'all feel like family. And I don't want to say that to be invitational. You got to be careful this day and age. I don't know, the state of mind of random people listening. They might hear me say, oh, y'all are family, and be like, well, then I can show up at his front door unannounced and be weird about it. That's not what I mean. And I know y'all are not like that. But again, since my audience is small, since I am not driven by dollar signs, that means any audience that I've grown has been 100% organic. And that means that y'all are with me because there's something about me that you find relatable or entertaining, or you feel like you're with me from the ground floor of something. We have this connection, and I know it because y'all email me from time to time, and you're just telling me about, your like Ed's getting his JET certification. Asaf is building his new content creation computer, and he did a live stream for the first time in his life. And we talk about computers, and we talk about his builds and his 3D prints and his renders. And I'm just talking about Asaf now. And how he did this really cool thing a while back where he flew his drone around. Are you in Tel Aviv, Asaf? Forgive me for blanking out on that. I know you're in Israel. Was it Tel Aviv? But he flew around from like rooftop to rooftop, an apartment complex to apartment, to visit his friends during COVID with his drone. It was really cool, and they're like drinking wine and waving to the drone, and while Asaf is flying around to all his buddies. It's such a cool. I'm gonna find that video and put it in the podcast description. So no matter where you're listening to this, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or Spreaker or Google Podcasts or the iHeartRadio app, whatever, look in the podcast description. I'm going to find a link to that video so y'all can watch it. But there's so many others of you that email me and we talk, because I feel like this audience is small enough where I can still manage all that. And anybody I'm talking to, the listeners I'm talking to, I'm not thinking of like a faceless mass when I get on the mic here. I feel like it's really cool that y'all are spending time with me, because there's so much out there that you could rather spend your time on. There's things that you're going to spend your time on after you're done with this episode. But I appreciate that in this life and in these days of shorter and shorter hours, it seems like there's not enough time, that you are spending some time with me. And that means a lot to me. And in that way, that makes us family. That certainly makes us friends. And I love talking to y'all. I love answering your emails. I will apologize right now that I need to like reset my notifications and things for like Instagram and Facebook, I think. And for the website's pretty good. If somebody emails me on the website, I definitely see that. Or if you email me directly, johnny@geektherapyradio.com, I definitely see that. But I went through, for instance, on Facebook. Actually, a better for instance is Instagram. A while back, a few weeks ago, a friend in real life, somebody from church is like, hey, I've got a friend, another teacher who is having a wedding and they're curious about renting the DeLorean, and I had them send a message to you through Instagram. And I was like, oh, I don't usually check messages on Instagram. I've got an Instagram. Of course, I put kind of geeky things on there or kind of cute things with my son or whatever. But I was like, I don't do the DMs too much on Instagram. So I had to go back and check. Man, I went to Geek Therapy Radio Instagram and I had like a dozen messages going back to like 2 years ago of people asking me, hey, what do you think about this thing, or want to talk to me about whatever. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel terrible. I feel terrible that these people have been reaching out to me. Listeners have been reaching out to me, asking me these questions like, so-and-so has asked you a question 105 weeks ago. I'm like, what? I'm so sorry about that. I need to get better because I don't have social media. I don't set it up on my phone or any device that I have to really send me notifications when I get a message or like a like or a reply to things. I can't do that because my phone would be blowing up all the time, just with personal Facebook stuff, just people replying and liking. I don't need to know all that, but I would like to know all that for the radio show sides of things. At least people sending me direct messages on Facebook or through Messenger or whatever. I would like notifications on that, but like I don't have notifications activated for much. On Twitter, I do have DM notifications activated, and that is partly because sometimes I reach out to other creators, like in the tech space or whatever. On Instagram, for instance, Jonathan Morrison. Before I had him on the show, you should go back and listen to that episode. That episode is great, especially like the latter portion of the discussion where we get into real talk. But anyways, Jonathan Morrison and I had been talking, DMing each other on Twitter for a long time, like 2 years off and on, about, hey, let's get on the show, let's do the thing. So I'll have Twitter DMs because I don't have a whole ton of DMs in there, and I figure I'll just get the notification so I don't miss, actual messages from people that I want to have on the show, coordinating things. So I reach out to me. I'm going to be doing a better job on the other outlets of communication, mainly social media, to check that stuff so I know that when y'all are talking to me that I can reply to you. But just to keep things succinct and to the point, the best way to contact me is just to email me straight up, johnny@geektherapyradio.com, JOHNNY @geektherapyradio.com, or you can just go to geektherapyradio.com, and the contact form is the very first thing you see, and it does not sign you up for any sort of mailing list. It doesn't put you on any sort of advertisement thing. It's just talking to me directly. It goes right to my email. More Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, geektherapyradio.com to contact me or for more information. I spent a whole bunch of earlier in the show talking about how I don't have sponsors and how that's both good and not great, but great in some ways and not great in the other. But if you want to sponsor Geek Therapy Radio, have me voicing ads for you, whatever, in content or whatever, just you can reach me, geektherapyradio.com or johnny@geektherapyradio.com. I will say, for anybody listening, I have been approached several times over the past 5 years for sponsors wanting to give me money to promote products or services, and I have turned every single one of them down. I've turned them down with some tact and some class, but it's things that like don't really fit the show or seem sketchy in some way, or it's like, I'm not gonna be promoting your vape shop on here. I don't feel comfortable maybe pimping CBC oil to my listeners, and I'm not saying anything especially about CBC oil. I'm not saying anything directly negative about it, but that kind of pseudo stuff, like, I just feel bad about it. But like, if a company, let's see, what would be a good fit for Geek Therapy Radio? If an electronics company or an electronics recycler, for instance, wanted to wanted me to, do ads for them on the show, or wanted to sponsor the show in some way. Used video game shops, internet cafes around town, things, all sorts of things. Toy stores, hobby shops. Perfect example would be hobby shops. Music stores, music instruments, whatever. Like, there's so much that fits under the umbrella of Geek Therapy Radio. I am all for that. If somebody comes along to me, especially if it's a small business owner and we can just talk face to face and handshake, deal this all out, that's how I roll. But just letting y'all know, I do turn down money. I have done so several times for businesses and services that I just don't really feel comfortable about. And so 5 years ago, I would say 2017 was that. Vaping wasn't new 5 years ago, but vaping, I would say, was kind of at this kind of peak, that they were, vape shops and things were striking while the iron was hot before all the science inevitably comes in that it's terrible for you. So a few years ago when I'm doing my show, I had a few vape shops reaching out. Hey, we just opened up, want to, sponsor the show, have people know about us, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, nah. And the reason why I was was I was like, the science is going to come out on this, just like it came out for cigarettes, that this is not. It used to be they used to sell cigarettes. It'll cure your headaches, and it's a cure-all. And if your 9-year-old son has a headache, smoke up, Johnny. That's kind of where it was, because all the science wasn't there yet to tell you, oh, this is the leading cause of cancer in the entire world. I'm not saying vaping is the same way, but the science since then since a few years ago is definitely coming out like, holy crap, this is not good for you. Is it as bad as smoking cigarettes? Probably not, but it's still not good for you at all. And I'm just not gonna. I saw that writing on the wall years ago, so I told every vape shop that came at me, nah, I don't feel comfortable, promoting vape to my audience. For one thing, some of my audience at least is probably teenaged. They're at a kind of an impressionable, I just want to be accepted by my peers type of age. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen when you're older. If you're a teenager and you're listening to me right now, it still somewhat happens. But I remember being a teenager. It's all impending when you're a teenager, trying to be accepted by your peers. And I know there's a lot of peers, especially a few years ago, vaping, and it wasn't as bad as cigarettes, quote unquote, and people doing it. It's like, I don't want to give the 16, 17-year-old, 14-year-old listening to my show some sort of, one of my favorite podcasters or radio show hosts is slinging vapes. It must be okay. It's like, no, I don't want to be on the wrong end of that science when the science comes out, and the science is coming out, and I'm glad that I made the decision not to sell vapes. Anyways, let's talk about some geeky subjects. We're here in the third segment right here. I went to EPO today. It's a store here in Houston called Electronics Parts Outlet. Talk to Chris. He runs the shop. I was there grabbing some B-roll with my camera for a separate podcast I did for the museum a while back that I'm putting together. That's a good plug right there. The Houston Museum of Natural Science, we do have a podcast. It's called HMNS Beyond Bones Podcast. I'll repeat that again. I'll put a link in the podcast description if you grab the podcast. HMNS Beyond Bones Podcast. Now, I don't host or co-host every episode. Usually that's handled by Craig Lavati, who listeners might remember, who was on Black Coffee Radio with Justin King a while back. He's been on the station. But Craig Lavati usually hosts HMNS Beyond Bones podcast, but sometimes I step into hosting duty or co-hosting duty. Kat Havens is the usual co-host, but for the episode about EPO, Electronic Parts Outlet, it was me hosting. It was a quote-unquote Johnny project, as I tell the team at the museum. So HMNS Beyond Bones podcast. If you're curious about, because I know a lot of my listeners, especially podcast listeners, you also follow me on YouTube, Geek Therapy Radio YouTube, and you watch my videos and things like that. If you want to see what I'm doing, like more videos I'm making, more Johnny content from your mental curator, follow the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Like what you're used to seeing on my Geek Therapy Radio YouTube channel, it's my same flavor on everything, my same touch on what I do for the Houston Museum of Natural Science. So subscribe to the Houston Museum of Natural Science YouTube channel. Also, if you want to hear more podcasts, more content that is produced by me, I'm not necessarily on every episode of it, but I produce every episode of it. So that's HMNS Beyond Bones Podcast. One more time, HMNS Beyond Bones Podcast. So for the HMNS Beyond Bones Podcast, I did an episode about electronics parts outlet. And I went in today to get the B-roll so that when you watch the episode, the video version of the episode, that when we're talking about like an old radio or an old TV or a component or a device, whatever we're talking about on the podcast, you can see it. So I went out there. I'll repeat the address again later on, but it's 3753 Fondren Road. 3753 Fondren Road. It's Houston, Texas 77063. EPO is a Disneyland. And this is going to sound like an ad. EPO is not giving me a dime. Not a single penny. In fact, I have given them quite a few pennies over the past few years because I go in there and I see these things that I just can't live without. CRTs, tape decks, old computers of different vintage. I can't even, if I was to list all the stuff they had at Electronic Parts Outlet, it would be several episodes long. It's crazy the amount of crazy stuff they had, like model trains, model airplanes, capacitors, resistors, all sorts of components, lead acid batteries, deep cycle, solar panels, VCRs, car stereo stuff, 8-track players, turntables, reel-to-reel. Like, it's not, if you need a new belt, by the way, like for your reel-to-reel or your turntable, your record player, or your old Walkman that needs repairing, your cassette deck, belts. Where do you get belts? You get belts at EPO, Electronics Parts Outlet. That's the kind of store that it is. And I was talking to Chris, who runs the place, and there's not a lot that I can let out of the bag, but I'll just say that shops like EPO they are fewer and fewer between, unfortunately. I am actually going to try to reach out to Clint from Lazy Game Reviews. I've had Clint on my show several times. I've briefly talked to him about something like this in the past in passing, but I'm going to try to do whatever I can do, even if it means a little bit out of pocket on my part as part of just kind of donating to the cause. I really want Clint to get out here and do a piece about EPO. It is exactly the type of thing that Clint would hyperventilate about. This place is amazing. Computer Reset in Dallas, it's kind of like that. It's a slightly different situation, but it's the same kind of. It's things that need to be saved. It's a brick and mortar store that needs to be saved, because if places like this go away, they're not going to ever come back, and a repository like this won't ever come back. So we need more awareness of it. So I'm going to reach out to Clint and just say, hey man, how can we make this happen? How can I help get you out here to tell the story of EPO and make awareness for the shop? Because if any shop like this deserves awareness, it is EPO, Electronics Parts Outlet. One more time, the address, because this is not an ad. They're not paying me a dime. Electronics Parts Outlet, 3753 Fondren Road, Houston, Texas, 77063. Electronics Parts Outlet, 3753 Fondren Road, Houston, Texas, 77063. I saw some cool stuff. I bought a couple cool things while I was in there. Again, it's not an ad. It's just a store that I believe heavily in. More Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I just finished the last segment talking about EPO, Electronics Parts Outlet in Houston. It's at 3753 Fondren Road. Houston, Texas, obviously, 77063. They've got a website you can check out. And one part of the website, and again, for you just joining, this is not an ad. They're not paying me a dime. I'm just a geek, and this is the best geek heaven on earth I have ever found. I've known about EPO for a while, but it's important to save stores like this, preserve stores like this. So that's why I'm really going to try in this episode and in as many future episodes as I need to recommend electronics parts outlet to any sort of geek about any sort of hobby, whether it's electronics or model airplanes or trains or whatever it is. If you build electronics, if you build robotics, if you're into 8-tracks, cassette players, if you're into cassette tape decks, if you're into VCRs, CRTs, all that kind of stuff, components, solar, tubes, anything, TVs from the 1940s, electronics parts outlet. Chris doesn't really like when I say it like this, but it's a museum that you can buy the artifacts. That's really a good way to put it. Just because Chris wants to stress that this is a business, we're trying to keep the doors open here. So, but it's a museum where you can buy the artifacts. That's the best way to describe it. The nostalgia kick when you open a case. A camcorder case from like the late 1970s, like the first camcorders, the type of camcorder where you had the video camera portion of it and then a thick cable running out the bottom of the handle down to the VCR that's in a carrying satchel, like a leather and tweed carrying satchel. When you open that up, in the smell that hits you, it is 1978 again. Or it's 1982 again, it's 1985 again. Like the nostalgia, it hits you. It's almost overwhelming. Some of the stuff where you just smell. Look, if they ever get like an IBM 5150 or something in there, a 386, a 286, an 8-track that came out of like an El Camino or something like that, you smell it. Like, oh yeah, people smoked cigarettes back then. I miss that. It's just such a nostalgia hit, and you can buy these things. It's just they're there, and you can buy them, and oh gosh. So it's EPO, Electronic Parts Outlet, and I know some of y'all listening right now in the Houston area know of EPO. Support EPO. Again, not being paid a dime for any of this. I'm not getting any stuff there. I pay for things from them that I want. They don't give me any free things or whatever. It's just I believe in EPO. And I'll wrap it up here with their contact information again and their hours. Their hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. They are closed on Sundays. Their phone number, 713-784-0140. If you need some random part from a 1962 RCA Victor turntable with the speaker built into it, console type thing, they probably have it. 713-784-0140. Electronics Parts Outlet. You can follow them on social media too. Instagram is at Electronic Parts Outlet, sorry. And the same thing for Facebook at Electronic Parts Outlet. Have I been saying electronics? It's Electronic Parts Outlet. That's the name of their store. I hope I haven't been bogging that up the whole time. The address one more time, 3753 Fondren Road, Houston, Texas, 77063. I'll put the linkity-doodahs in the podcast in the podcast description because I do want to move on. I bought a 1960s solid state Sears, was it Silvertone? Silver something radio. It's Art Deco, plastic, 1960 something. I bought this radio because I want it as like a background piece for whenever I would do these episodes, like to put on YouTube or a video component. I want like the vintage radio thing because, hey, I'm on a vintage radio format, AM radio. It's still alive and well. But yeah, so I want to move on to talk about drones a little bit. If you remember a few weeks back, we were all speculating the most leaked drone probably ever in history, the DJI Mavic Mini 3 Pro, finally came out. There were no separate variants of it. There was no Mini 3 and Mini 3 Pro. It's all just Mini 3 Pro. We know all the specs about it. All the specs that were rumored were true. The thing, though, with me is, so I have one pre-ordered. I pre-ordered it through Amazon, and it should ship like June. What is it? was it June? At the end of June, I think is when end of June is when it ships. So about, a month and a half after recording the show, I got the bundle. It was, I'll just let you know the price, $909, but that comes with the fancy DJI RC with the built-in screen, because it's just a pain in the butt to put a phone in the cradle and do all the thing. I just wanted something that could be charged with the USB Type-C, that I didn't have to be messing around with a phone call or having my flight interrupted by notifications coming and whatever. I just wanted something that I could travel with, charge by Type-C, and get great footage up in the air. What spurred this on, and I talked about the logic in a past episode, is like, for these kind of more expensive tools, part of it's that it's a toy, yes, but these tools, like my laptop, I gave a good example of. These big ticket items, I upgrade every 3 to 5 years is about the thing. So this DJI Mavic Pro that I have, the first generation Mavic, came out in 2016. 2016 is when this thing came out, and I've had it for, what is that, 6 years? At least 6 years at this point, and it's a little long in the tooth. And by that I mean, most people looking at the footage that I pull from it, by itself, if you were to look at the footage by itself, you're like, oh, that's great. But the thing is, technology has advanced since then, and video technology, camera sensors and things. So I've got this Panasonic Lumix S5 that puts out spectacular image. Just obviously, it's worth every penny that I paid for it. It is full frame format. It's amazing. And I could tell this when I did the Battleship Texas video for the museum, which y'all should check out. The USS Texas, Battleship Texas video is freaking epic. Just type in HMNS USS Texas or Battleship Texas, whatever. If it's from the Houston Museum of Natural Science, that's the last big project that I did. And I was getting epic drone shots of it. Epic drone shots when I met with my first generation Mavic Pro. But what I noticed is there's such a gap now between technology from 6 years ago on the drone and the new Panasonic S5 that I have that's more recent, I think from 2021. You can tell when I switch between the footage. The drone footage is obviously lacking compared to the juicy, crispy, awesome natural colors and dynamic range and everything that I'm able to get from a full frame sensor of my Panasonic camera. So I was like, okay, maybe now is the time that I upgrade the drone that I carry around and use for these projects and use for work. The Mavic Mini came out. I loved the Mavic Mini SE before I smashed it into a wall inside of a building. I love that form factor, and the biggest thing to me was the footage. And now here's my rub as we wrap up Geek Therapy Radio for this week. Here's my rub now. I've already pre-ordered the DJI Mavic Mini 3 Pro with the RC controller and everything like that for $909. But now I'm thinking, if footage is what I'm after, if the name of the game is footage without spending $5,000, I'm not spending $5,000 on a Mavic 3 Pro or Mavic 3 Cine. But I am debating now between the Mavic Mini 3 Pro or the Mini 3 Pro and the Mavic 3 Pro, the big brother. Type-C power delivery charging, that's still Type-C power charging. The image sensor is a 4/3 sensor, so bigger than an inch. That's the toss-up. You are worthy of love. Thanks for listening.